take your seats. The programme is about to begin. Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg Television's Lizzie Burden.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Bloomberg Live event. We're going to be talking about winning the innovation game, modernizing IT without disruption. So thank you all for joining us. It's really great to have so many of you in the room with us here in London, but we've also got lots of people joining remotely. So if you're with us in spirit on the live stream, thanks for joining us as well. During this briefing, we're going to have executives from across industries discussing the implementation of groundbreaking AI, cybersecurity, and data management technologies as well, and how they're transforming workplaces at such a rapid pace. But when it comes to incorporating all of this digital architecture, yes, there are opportunities to create efficiencies, to provide utility to businesses and consumers alike, but also we have to train workforces to utilize this technology appropriately as well. And that means that partnerships across a range of institutions and providers are really going to be key. I'm sure this is all stuff that you talk about throughout your day-to-day jobs, but together today, there are a few things we want to accomplish. So first of all, we want to collaborate on new solutions to some of the thorniest technology issues out there, facing finance, facing insurance, facing transportation, facing the telecoms industries today. We also want to spark new ideas by connecting all of you, this diverse group that we have with us today, across all of you executives, across different sectors. And we also want to amplify best practices to create safer and more efficient workplaces. But before we get started, a bit of housekeeping, a couple of announcements. First, I really want to thank our sponsor today, Rocket Software, and we're going to hear more from them later in the programme. I also want to invite you to be part of the discussion. I don't just want you to sit and watch. We want you to get involved, and you can ask questions of the panelists that we'll have up here using the QR code that you see on the screen. It's also in the middle of your tables, so give it a try, make sure that it's working for you, because I'm sure that you've got lots to add to this conversation as well. We'd love for you to get involved on social media too. If you've got those comments and questions for our panelists, the hashtag is winning innovation, and you can follow along today's highlights. We're going to share those highlights and engagement using the handle @Bloomberg Live, and you can also tag us if you post as well. So without further ado, I would love to welcome our sponsor, Rocket Software, for some opening remarks, and it's my pleasure to introduce Milan Shetti, CEO and President of Rocket Software.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you. Thank you for having us here. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Rocket Software is an enterprise software provider to most mission-critical applications in regulated industries. And I wanted to share this, give the background of Rocket Software, and also why we chose the title, Modernizing IT Without Disruption, for this panel and good set of discussions happening later today on cybersecurity as well as on data security, as well and the AI aspects of general trend which is happening there. So, Rocket Software, you customers in the audience are probably using Rocket software or have used Rocket software, but you were just not aware of it. The company was formed in 1990 as a technology provider to IBM. Now, Rocket has grown in size, scale. Recently, earlier this year, we acquired Micro Focus, a business unit from Micro Focus, application, modernization, and connectivity business for $2.275 billion. We are grateful to have AMC, part of Micro Focus, part of Rocket Software. The company was formed in 1990 with a partnership with IBM. The partnership has continued to strengthen over the last 35 years. I joined Rocket about 4 years ago as the second CEO of Rocket Software, as our founder decided to step back and be an executive chairman. Since then, we have grown and understood and tried to bring to market what we have learned in the last 35 years. There were 3 things which we learned from an experience in providing software technologies to regulated industries in financial services, healthcare, and transportation. The first and the most important thing we learned was our customers are in risk management business. They need to manage the risk. But leads to the second one, which is, however, they cannot stay behind on trends in the marketplace, whether it was the IT trend, the hybrid cloud trend, or now the AI trend. So they need to modernize while managing the risk. And the third thing, which we learned working with our customers for 35 years, was that they want all of this without disruption. So art and science of doing modernization without disruption is what we at Rocket Software honed in on and sharpened over this period of time. So we are a Bain Capital private equity owned firm now, and looking to learn from you, participate in conversations about AI as well as security. The trends come and go. IT infrastructure and IT providers and the solution providers and the customers need to keep pace with the trend while also making sure they do not cause disruption to their infrastructure. So in some ways, modernization and disruption is oxymoron. But we can do it. We have done it before. And as the AI trend and the data security trends continue to take hold, we look to do it again together. Modernization, IT without disruption. I do also want to thank Lizzie and the Bloomberg team for hosting us here. My executive staff is here sitting at this table. For any questions during the reception, please do reach out to them or they will reach out to you. And I also want to thank all the panelists for discussing 2 very important topics, AI and data security. With that, Lizzie, I would like to welcome you back to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Milan, for kicking us off. I'm really excited to get into our first conversation. So let me welcome to the stage our first panel. We have Deepika Adsumili from BT Group. We also have Sarah O'Keen from Barclays Investment Bank. And we have Wendy Redshaw from NatWest Group. We're going to be talking about how AI can drive transformation in the respective industries we have on the stage now, so banking and telecoms, and how we can do it, as Milan says, without disruption. So let's start off by thinking about the opportunity that AI presents. Deepika, you must be getting so many inquiries from your customers, because obviously BT has so many customers. How is a company like yours actually using AI to serve customers better?
Thank you, Lizzie. We have about 20 million customers across in the UK and 450 stores that we operate from our consumer side of the business, and we have 1 million business customers as well. So there's a lot of customer interaction that we do. And like with any telco organizations out there or anything that has any CX platform out there, we are invested quite broadly into our chatbots. We want to be able to give customers the same amount of experience they have online. They have a lot of AI-driven experiences, personalized experiences, data-driven experiences, and also a lot of decision experiences they already have in their hands, which is well understood from where they're coming from. So we strive to be able to provide those experiences back to the customers and stay aboard with their expectations. And then also to be able to bring efficiency to them in a wider state of understanding either with the business customer or the consumer directly, to be able to say, what are your options? Where do you go? And also provide a service that is quite seamless with the sales. So there is a lot that we've invested in from the vast amount of data we have sitting with ourselves and with AI being applied on top of it and the several use cases we serve back. It is quite interesting, and we're seeing a lot of productive feedback back from the customers. We're seeing a lot of productive feedback back from our colleagues, agents who work with the customers as well as the businesses, from how they service, the productivity in service, and the feedback that we get as well.
And Wendy, is it similar in banking? I'm wondering, we're going to discuss the future, but right now, what can AI already do when it comes to retail banking?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And by the way, thanks for having us, all three of us on. Well, we've been using AI actually within NatWest Group for a long period of time. And probably our models are about 15% AI based. And so the type of things that it would be used for would be, yes, personalization, very relevant there, but also for protection and keeping our customers safe. AI is particularly good for finding the needle in a haystack. So fin crime, fraud, that type of thing it's really good for. So these are the types of places that the scaled AI can be used for. And of course, let's face it, we also have introduced Gen AI into our chatbot.
Yeah.
She has had 10.8 million.
She,
sorry. Shouldn't say she, should I? Very genderish, but I do call her a she. Probably shouldn't do that.
does she have a name?
Quora is her name, and as I'm not in marketing, the Quora, that's traditional AI, blended with the Gen AI, she's known as Quora Plus. Okay, which is why I do technology and not. But yeah, so we incorporate in a number of ways.
And Sarah, you've worked a lot on the investment banking and capital market side. What are the use cases beyond the consumer side in banking? What's driving the innovation for you?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a step back as well when we look at the adoption rates of AI across all industries, including banking and financial services, irrespective of what area of banking that you work in. And this was really thanks to the launch of ChatGPT, because it's a large language model and we'd never had a large language model made public previously. So ChatGPT had over 100 million users in 2 months, and we had CEOs going home at the end of the day having dinner with their kids, and they were talking about the same thing that they were speaking about in the boardroom.
I feel there's like life before ChatGPT and life after ChatGPT.
Yeah. So I think when we talk about adoption and the fast pace of adoption, I think that's really, really key. And I think it garnered so many users because it adds value and of its usability. And I think that's really, really important. So as a result of that, you have everybody who would never have seen themselves as technologists or want to go near technology as really embracing that. So we have thousands of use cases of AI across the bank, including within our investment bank. We've seen in numerous banks, they're using it to give better financial advice, to assess market, to predict the market and assess market conditions live in real time, faster than a human would be able to react to the markets. And to Wendy's point, we've used AI in financial services and investment banking for close to 50 years, but it's the changes that generative AI have brought about that give new data, new insights, and make us more agile. in the market.
Now, at this point, I just want to bring in a question from the audience. It's popped up on the screen in front of me. I will say, if you have any, do send them in through the QR code. And if you would like to target them at a particular panelist, feel free to specify. But here's the first one. Given the transformative potential of AI in the telecoms industry, so Deepika, I'm sure this is for you, particularly with the rollout of 5G networks, how can AI be leveraged to accelerate product development and time to market, but still ensure that optimal performance and reliability?
Great question. We think about this all the time, right? So I think the first wave of a lot of the use cases that we worked on at BT have been, as we said, from a CX perspective, how do we service our consumers better? How do we use data to be able to get back to certain sales and personalize and all of that? Once we have understood those use cases, the second step of use cases that we are looking at is end-to-end process reinvention, which means when you're serving up a customer, how do you bring all of the nuance of how the networks are working? How do you understand the entire the remit and the bandwidth of everything that we are doing? So we've bought in a lot of, funnily enough, with 2G decommissioning and 3G decommissioning as well. There's a lot of AI we've used in there to be able to tell us, how to decommission it, how to go first, how to go second, and all of that. With 5G and also potentially 7G coming in, we are keeping a tight eye on the network availability to be able to let businesses know or customers know of how their network availability looks like, and how do we transition that into any of the field operations that we need to make available. And as a whole data set, how do we come back to the customer to service them better and better? And because we have such large profile of data, and it sits from customer understanding to how our networks work, even for businesses, where they use most of their spending in, and also how they use their data across. We service a lot of those use cases going back to be able to let them know how their availability works with the networks, or how we show a lot of availability across the customer usage as well. So there is a vast amount of things that we could do, especially with network availability and how network data is going at the moment. There's a lot of use cases we're working on.
I hope that answers the question of whoever submitted that anonymously. I hope there'll be more. Let's just talk about how this transition is going then. Wendy, where are you up to in banking as an industry?
As an industry, I think a lot of the excitement at the dinner table was met again with excitement around the organisations, and I think every bank, every organisation probably had the same thing. Hey, this is cool. Yeah. So one of the things that one has to do is to be very careful about how that happens. So exploring, putting data out onto the internet, not ideal when you have personal, private data that you want to keep safe. So severing to a degree our large language from the internet, and having a safe space in which to experiment. I think a lot of the industry has gone in that direction. I really applaud that. The second thing was really to the sort of the federation of what good ideas there were, right? Whereas before it would have a tendency to be, if you want something that's an IT transition or an activity that was changing the business, you would tend to go, almost, you'd have the senior people having a think through, getting a strategy and whatever. And in this case, we have a real federation of those ideas. And rather like, I suspect with Deepika, we actually pulled those together. We went through, we ranked them, prioritised them. We got something around 100 that were actually pretty good ones. And by pretty good, it would be either it keeps our customers safer, or it protects more generally the industry, and so on. Or there's a really good business case, it's really cool, it's really good personalisation. And actually we then took a sample of those and we worked through those in 2023 and 2024. And I suspect that many organisations, I don't think NatWest Group is the only one who's taken something of a careful but open-minded approach to these things in order to just refine those use cases, because the technology itself, technology trends come and go, but this one just feels a bit different. And I think that's really where so many people have actually started to really get involved with that.
There's a question that's just come in that I feel is really relevant to this. So what strategies do you employ to ensure adherence to the data privacy regulations, but while handling this customer data and implementing these AI projects within your organisation. I mean, maybe you can speak broadly to the industry on that, Wendy.
Yeah, I mean, I can, but probably the specificity of how we've done, as a regulated entity, how we're doing it, and maybe Sarah has also an opinion from the sort of investment side of things. So we actually have our model risk actually reaching out across both AI and non-AI controls. We have data and AI ethics principles which are firmly adhered to, and they would be things like ensuring there's human agency, ensuring that it's free from bias, that it's technically robust, reliable and safe. So really looking then broader at things like, is this societally and environmentally an okay thing to do? So principles like that. The key thing though, and I think we were having a discussion just beforehand, the key thing though, this is a thing that is evolving very, very quickly. So the idea being that you have to really be thinking about evolution while you're thinking about controls. Yeah. And that's really, I think everyone is going to be in that sort of position.
So Sarah, is it the same on the investment banking side?
Absolutely. I think that is one of the challenges that we have when we look to implement AI and we look at its capabilities. There are some barriers to that, and making sure that we are the customer and our clients are at the centre of everything that we do. And even with regulations, we also have a duty of care to protect and educate our customers on those. So that is something that is a real challenge. So, I mean, we've got incredibly stringent controls, considerations at all stages. And to Wendy's point, you need to have a human in the loop and consideration outside of AI for how you protect around those as well. So a technology and non-technology side to focusing on those.
Because I kind of wonder from a regulatory standpoint, how much that's a help or a hindrance. We've had a change of government, we've had all these new regulations. In this transition to bringing in AI, is there anything that could be done to make it easier? Or do you feel supported? Do you feel championed in this transition?
I think it's, I don't want to comment on regulators specifically, but I'd say that it's up to the organisation, right, to make sure that they're managing those risks. I mean, from a personal perspective and with other banks that I've advised as a management consultant, I would, we see that, I mean, it's a risk, banks take a risk-based approach irrespective of the regulations. And like I said, the customers and their experience and their safety is an absolute priority for any industry that I'm aware of that has customers. So I think it is focusing on that and making sure they're mitigating that risk. Obviously you need to adhere to regulations, but there is that consideration there of looking after the risk irrespective of that.
That's what I hear from so many business leaders when they're navigating all of this. Let's take this next question that's been sent in. They say, you made the distinction between tradition and generative AI. Can you talk, or will you talk about the investment that you're thinking about with regards to generative, and what are the expectations in terms of the timing of returns on investment and real efficiency gains?
Would you like me to take that?
If you're volunteering.
Sure, I will. I'll take that because in June we actually did announce it, Quorum Plus. So it is a combination of traditional and generative AI. So what can we tell with that? So just to Sarah's point, we have to be very careful with that. So to get an agreement to be able to put Gen AI in the public for our customers, there were a range of things we had to do. And one of the things we had to do was to cap how many conversations that we had and check every time the conversations were had that there weren't any hallucinations, because obviously you tend not to get those with deterministic AI, but you do get them with generative AI. So it meant that we were really in the weeds with what we were doing. And of course, you can't put something out there and say it's successful without data points. So at what point could you be able to say that this is a return on investment that's worth making? So we checked things like, well, obviously accuracy. So from a technical implementation point of view, of course, that's standard. But actually looking at the containment rates, the speed with which a customer was able to be satisfied, their actual opinion on the satisfaction of the answers and so on. We actually saw that that was coming through as 150%. Of way higher actually than what we had anticipated, so much so that we were able to keep that pilot running. It was initially a pilot in live, but a pilot nonetheless. It was going to be for 12 weeks and it's now going to be for 12 months because the amount of data that we're learning about how people interact with it is really strong. But immediately we are seeing the benefit to the customers of doing that and, you know, having a more natural language interaction to quickly get to the answers that they need or the things that they need, and a satisfaction that improves. That is a return on investment because obviously you can do that instead of doing it another way.
Yeah, so I feel like this theme of learning as you go comes up again and again. Deepika, I was wondering what advice you'd give to everyone in the room. If you're a business getting AI ready, how do you do it, to Milan's point, without disruption?
Absolutely. Are we talking about large organization, medium or small? So there's a different landscape, right? How you use AI to go through your business needs or requirements to your customers. How do you provide certain experiences? Essentially for any business out there, and we work with a lot of businesses through our BT business side of our organization, and we always tell them that, you know, you have to be able to understand the buckets that you want to operate back to your customers. It is what experiences do you provide to your customers, from how do you interact with them? How do you understand your interactions with them, and how do you use AI to provide a better, efficient interaction? How do you work within the communities of your organization to be able to bring more efficiency, productivity, and gains into your organization that creates efficiency so you can provide better services back to your customers? And also there is, if you're a small business organization, there's so much potential to use marketing creatives and a lot of reach out to you know, predictive analytics or a lot of the details on personalization that can put you a step ahead of other businesses. So there's a lot of scope over there as well. Over and above all of that, how do you contribute back to the community of the business that you're, you know, sectors that you're operating in? So we have, we work with our businesses across the BT business to be able to enable a lot of digital spectrum for them as well, because we provide a lot of digital tooling from the network impact that we give them as well. So we are also educating them how to use AI across their businesses, and we and it's a really good, you know, sort of sentiment that we bring back as well. So pick the buckets that you want to be able to work on, understand the data that you have, see that you interact well with your customers, and also understand how you can bring productivity and efficiency back that will, you know, help the customers grow.
So it all sounds nice. There's someone out there in the audience who wants to know, Deepika, what's the financial impact that you predict Gen AI will have at BT?
I think we just did our financial earnings calls as well, so that's quite on point. We are very ambitious at BT. Extremely ambitious. What we started doing, we are well ahead of our data journey as well. All of our data is in GCP. We have multi-cloud strategy. We use GCP and AWS. So our foundations for data, foundations for AI, and how we work across the business, our data governance and our data ethics and all of that are firmly built into our foundations. The next step is to scale. The way we have invested in 12 use cases across the organization, we have a vast landscape. We have the EE side, consumer business, we have the B2B business, we have open reach that we work across for field operations, and we also have networks that goes across all of it. And we have a large amount of colleague base of 120,000 colleagues. So we have to see how our communities are built as well. With all of that, the next step, and we've invested in use cases across it, which range from chatbots, which range from understanding our field operations better. We've made an investments there. We're getting return on investment. The next step for us is to do end-to-end services, to do process reinvention, which addresses the business end-to-end, to be able to have an AI-first thinking, and to be able to see, is it an AI use case before even a digital use case or a digital journey for us. Which then that brings us to a certain amount of amazing numbers where we think we can make about easily through data and AI about 1 billion in return on investment in the next 5 years. But we want to be further more ambitious because we have growth targets, cost transformation targets about 3 billion, but we have further growth targets in the organization, and we want to be able to push the lever a lot to be able to see that we can get a lot of return on investment by underpinning our strategy with data and AI first.
Okay, really interesting, and I'm glad we put a number on it. Well, given that we're at this time of year when we are budgeting and everyone's planning ahead, Wendy, what sort of industry-wide trends are you seeing?
Industry, really looking at colleague, to your point, where even minutes shaved off a colleague's time will be a really big benefit. So very much sort of colleague augmentation, so improving the way that colleagues are able to do things, freeing them up for the sort of human being part. I'm seeing that a lot. And then stepping into working in digital, your competition isn't the other banks. Your competition is everything, everything that exists. And so it's really a case of just looking at the horizon, what is coming, what do we need to do to actually incorporate that sort of ease expectation in a regulated framework. So I'd say those are the big trends.
Well, Sarah, if your competition is everything, maybe you can answer this next question. Given the continuous advancements in AI capabilities, how do you ensure that your products stay relevant and continue to address genuine customer needs, and it's not just AI for the sake of AI? It's a good question, that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Our products are our customers, so we have to adapt our products to meet our customer needs. So we don't just create a product and put it out there. It's what is the customer problem that we're trying to solve for, and that is at the forefront of when we think creatively and innovatively around what our clients' needs. So it's very much a focus as part of that. Like at the moment, yesterday and today, we're doing a 24-hour hackathon in Barclays, which is offices around the globe, over 2,000 people. And we're looking at the biggest problems that our clients have across the bank, and how can we solve for them using Gen AI. It's the second time we've done it in 6 months. So it's that type of knowledge, using all different people from across the organisation to challenge, test and make sure that our products are fit for what our customer needs, but also that we're using the most up-to-date technology, we've got the most up-to-date thoughts, and that we're using the most amount of data and evidence to back that up.
Wendy, you mentioned that our competition is everybody, it's not just colleagues, but I'm sure there are lots of people who are worried that they're going to be displaced by robots and that their jobs are going to be on the line because of AI. How do you stay relevant? Is this something that your teams are asking about? And when they do, what do you tell them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It does come up all the time. So certainly if you actually, so generative AI in particular looks like it's human. And in fact, when you look at some of the things that it does really well, it looks like it's superhuman. So it's bound to make people freak out a little bit.
It's
like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have a job. This thing is so much better. If you actually go back to the mathematics of it and how it works, it's actually superhuman at certain things and really not very good at all at other things. And the things that it's not very good at all at, humans are brilliant at. We don't just look at data. We have optical ability, looking at people. We are able to intuitively see things. We interact in a particular way and so on. That's not, we reason in a particular way. That's not where Gen AI is amazing. But where Gen AI is amazing, it really is. So it is definitely an augmentation side of things. But for example, it can be very frightening when you think about, you look at it, you see it, you use ChatGPT, it answers questions more quickly than you can. You do get that feeling of fear. And so what we've done with our, overall with our organisation, and I know a lot of organisations are thinking of doing that, is upskill everyone, AI awareness for everyone, not allowing that fear to paralyse people and make them feel disenfranchised, in fact, to make them feel empowered. And certainly when we did a pilot of a program of getting AI awareness in people who are not technical, it turned them into champions. I mean, they were so pro. I can see where it could be used here. I can see, really excited. You know, that's really evangelical, whereas before they'd been a little bit concerned. So I think that's the way to do it. Just demystify and get people involved.
Deepika, do you get that enthusiasm across departments, across
Absolutely.
ages?
Yeah, and then the one thing that we've been trying to get it across to our agents, to our customer service agents, even to our sales teams who think they know, how do they approach, how do they use AI? We've been talking about giving them wings. It's like their digital twin. You can use it for efficiency. You can use it for better language sometimes. You can use it to understand if the call went better. You can summarize the calls better. So there is a lot of that adoption-oriented, conversations that we are having across the teams to say that, as you said, even if it's 10% of productivity that you see in their day-to-day, it's a lot. Even if you're able to give a service team member an understanding of how they've done today or how many customers they've spoken to and how the customers feel about the conversations, it's a great win to continuously go back to the team and say, yes, you are in charge of this. You're the ones who are servicing the customer, but how do we provide these wings? How do we automate chores that you do not want to do? How do we automate the questions? Or when you want to be able to, quantify a customer for certain things, that can be done, automatically, and you don't have to waste your time for chores. You can use it for better purposes of serving value back.
Which is what you were saying, really. Get the boring stuff done by the AI and then you can focus on the human bits. Exactly. But Sarah, when everything's changing so fast, I can barely keep up. How do you stay on top of it all as an employee?
It's quite challenging. I think even people who work in AI, because it's so rapidly advancing, it's quite hard to keep up to date. I think it is about educating people, and we've all spoken about that now. AI is absolutely a team sport, and you need the different perspectives of the different functions, the different client types, the different people throughout the organisation. So, it's keeping up to speed on trends, challenging ourselves, and utilising some of the fintechs and providers that we partner with to make sure that we are using the most up-to-date advancements and that we have that education. But education is of the entire population of each of the industries that we work in is really, really key, including our clients in that as well. And I think that's how we stay on top of it.
Okay. I just want to throw out a question that we've been sent in, and if there's any more, do feel free. How are you choosing your LLM models? Are you adopting a multi-provider approach? Does anyone want to take that?
I'll take it. It's the type of thing that you're not meant to say, isn't it? So we are using a range of large language models, and in particular because some of the models will be more appropriate to certain use cases than others. But in addition to having, say, Quorum using a particular large language model, you'll remember I said that we check a human in the loop all the time. Well, the human in the loop doesn't have to be there all the time. So we've actually got a large language model, which is a different one, to do the judging, so that we actually have two sets of data. One is the large language model, one is a different large language model. We call it the judge, just to be a bit dramatic. And the judge actually is able to take an evaluation of what's going on. And so it's really a case of horses for courses. And while we're on the topic of large language models, I might as well put out there that large language models can be very data hungry. They can be very hungry from an energy perspective. So thinking about whether or not you should be using chained short language models, small language models, or is this the most appropriate way to do things, and refining that, I suspect that is going to come. So that will be something that it nudges towards.
Yeah, and just to add to that, when you do a large amount of use cases, then you want to be able to have an evaluation metrics as well, to be able to understand what are the business KPIs that you have, what are you servicing back, when do you use, and certain large language models or different LLM providers have small language models for certain use cases. Then you can use large language models depending on the questions that you use and how you go through the journey. So there's a lot happening on a day-to-day basis with the large language models and the providers and where we are going. I think understanding the weights and biases of each of these models to be able to use the right ones, multi-LLM provider approach is always great, because all the LLM providers have different specializations they come with. For example, Anthropic comes with more ethics and how do you have a certain voice. Mistral comes with a lot of small language model, large language model, cost implications and all of those other things. So it's always good to have evaluation metrics based on the business KPIs you're delivering, the kind of use cases that you're building.
Okay, I feel like we could continue this conversation for the whole hour, but thank you so much to all of you for our first panel and for the really great questions. So a round of applause for our first panel. Thank you. Well, thank you all. Next up, we've got a special presentation from Bloomberg Intelligence. We're going to hear from Tim Craighead, and Tim's going to take us through a survey that BI has done. It's the Chief Information Officer survey, and it's on corporate technology plans. So, Tim, welcome to the stage.
So, Lizzie, thank you very much for the intro. As she said, my name's Tim Craighead. I'm the Global Chief Content Officer for Bloomberg Intelligence, which is the investment research business within Bloomberg. And what I would like to do today, I think, is quite on point. I mean, this conversation going on today is all about taking advantage of innovation within technology, how you're applying it, how you're driving your business. And the survey that we've now done twice and will continue to do on a semi-annual basis is of chief information officers across companies, large and small, a blend of US and European with some Asian across all industry groups. And essentially what we have found, it's relevant from an investor perspective, which is our core business, because it's telling you who's gaining share, who's front of mind. It's also quite interesting, I think, from this perspective, because it can be a good touchstone in terms of what are other companies doing, who is gaining mind share, wallet share, and some of the thoughts on why. So, but yeah, I think it's, like I said, an interesting point of reference. I'll take about 10 minutes to run through this. The summary that I would throw out with you on this is that we're seeing a shift. We're seeing a shift from internal testing to deployment of real life tools. And you heard that on this panel that we just enjoyed listening to. We'll go through some of the thoughts and details, but we've looked into how well are companies feeling about their positioning right now. What are their priorities? Where's their focus? Things along those lines. So without further ado, I'll jump in. I'd start with 3 quick takeaways. The first is Microsoft is clearly gaining mind share and wallet share, at least according to our survey, across a number of elements, whether it's cloud, whether it's inferencing. This is specifically about data query and inferencing using their systems. Second takeaway, it's already been mentioned, I think, at least a dozen times today, and will probably come up another dozen, and that is cybersecurity. It has jumped significantly in the prioritization of what CIOs are telling us. No surprise given some pretty high-profile outages that have occurred over the course of the past 12, 18 months. And lastly, as the shift is going towards deploying AI and technology in real-world applications, customer service is front of mind. We just heard it here on the panel. Salesforce is an interesting touchstone with that, given their positioning, and you'll get some details in a second. So first thing, let's start by just simply saying, if any of you in your companies are feeling maybe a bit anxious that you're not quite there yet, you're not really ready for this crazy, wave of development, you're in good company. The vast majority of companies in our survey suggested they're not ready. It's changed a little bit from where it was 6 months ago, but this is what's pushing a lot of development, a lot of spending. So when is the money being spent? Now is the answer. It's over the next 6 to 12 months. We continue to see that there is a distinct appetite for CIOs to push their development along these lines. It's not a 3 or a 5 year, let's brainstorm and think about it down the road. It's here and it's now. So what are the priorities? There's a lot of information on this slide, and I am happy to share the slide deck, rest assured. But what is important in this is if you look on the left side and you look at the very first column that says December 23, you'd see that there are areas like servers and storage that were pretty high priority items. They're not now. You can look at on the far right-hand side, cloud and AI models that had some mind share 6-9 months ago. Now they have a lot of mind share. And you can see in the middle, cybersecurity, as I had alluded to, has had a massive jump relative to where it was. There are a couple points that I would also make with this data in mind. Number one, cybersecurity, as big of a priority as it is a relatively small component of most budgets. It's just super important. You got to get it right, stating the obvious. So it looks really big here, but it's a small number. Second point that I would make is that, at least in what we're hearing, while this shift is going on and there's a ton of focus on developing applications and tools and deploying technology, that in fact the overall tech budget at most companies isn't really changing. This is a bit of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. The advancements in AI deployment and tools and whatnot is coming at the expense of other elements more traditional in tech budgets. Maybe this is because of high interest rates. Maybe this is because of geopolitical uncertainty. We've been disappointed in 2024 on how this has trended. I think the street broadly has been. There's hope and expectation in 25 that maybe things relax a little bit. Interest rates are starting to come down. We've got some clarity on the election front, good, bad, or otherwise. And maybe things start to relax and loosen. We'll see. That's our current expectation. So if that's the background, let's get into some of the details. I had mentioned that cloud is gaining priority. Well, which cloud partners? Amazon, Microsoft, Google are the biggest players in the business. Sorry, the slides have been cutting off here a little bit, but nonetheless, you can see the names. It's a big three. There's definitely a triumvirate here, no surprise. An interesting thing, though, has been a bit of a shift over the last 6 or 9 months from Amazon towards Microsoft. And we think that's part and parcel of the next slide, which is what large language models, what foundational models are preferred. And at least from our survey, what we found late last year was that OpenAI was preferred. What we find in the third quarter of this year is that it's even more preferred. And there is a bit of a virtuous circle, it seems, playing back and forth between Microsoft and OpenAI, given their partnership. If you're Microsoft, you're using OpenAI. If you like OpenAI, it might take you to Microsoft. That's feeding off of each other. What else? Well, if we go digging into what capabilities companies are looking at exploring or implementing, and think about the three sets on the left, there's training of foundational models, there's fine-tuning of these models, and then there's development of generative AI tools. Think chatbots becoming co-pilots and co-pilots becoming agents, and some of what we talked about here with the banks and with BT. Let's dig a little bit into each of these categories. And one thing I would comment before I switch is just obviously the one that really jumped was that development front. This goes back to that shift that I mentioned right up front. We're seeing testing turning into real-world applications. So what about training of foundational models? Where are these workloads going? It goes back to what we talked about earlier. Amazon and Microsoft stand out. Google is a third. There is a little bit of that shift from Amazon to Microsoft in terms of what mind share, wallet share we're seeing. It's also notable that a number of other providers are starting to pop up. And maybe this is because they have areas of industry expertise or certain areas that they can bring a product to bear now that deployment is starting to work through. If you go down a level and think about inferencing workloads, what's going on here? Again, stand out, Microsoft and Amazon, but there is that big shift from Amazon towards Microsoft, and again, maybe that's that OpenAI link. same comment, we're seeing other providers starting to pop up in terms of who CIOs are looking at using and partnering with. Go down to the last level about developing applications and real tools. I think looking at customer service is a really interesting area to consider, in that that's where the rubber meets the road, where you're connecting with clients. And there's a lot of discussion and talk about how AI might help and enhance that relationship. What we found, and we're missing a couple of things on the slide from the standpoint of legends, but the left hand, well, it's those three buckets that we just looked at from the standpoint of training of workloads, fine-tuning of workloads, and developing tools and applications. All three of those areas for Salesforce, who these numbers focus on, have jumped. Salesforce is an interesting point of reference from our vantage point because they're the global leader in customer service software. They got roughly a 40% global share. If their clients are starting to spend more on these areas, it's a pretty good reference point in terms of what you might be seeing beyond. That's what I wanted to give a real broad overview of what we found in our survey, a couple of high spots. What I'd like to do next is sort of bring things to a close by giving everyone maybe 4 homework assignments, which might be a little bit unusual. But the first one's kind of fun. I assume pretty much everybody listens to podcasts. Go to your favorite thing, Apple, Spotify, take your pick. Find the Bloomberg Intelligence Tech Disruptors podcast. The last several episodes are with technology C-suite folks talking quite a lot about real-world applications and examples. The one from a few weeks ago with Mark Benioff from Salesforce I thought was particularly notable in talking about how they're bringing agents to bear across a lot of their platforms. And there's a number of really interesting, good examples of companies and organizations, profits and nonprofits, and how they're using AI and agents to expand the connectivity, the efficiency, and the experience of their sales forces. Second homework assignment, if you want more detail on our CIO survey, I only touched on a little bit of this. There's a much larger report. We're happy to send it along. If you've got a Bloomberg terminal in your company, you can access it there directly, but give me a holler. I'm happy to send it. And before I get to this, 2 more homework assignments. If you're traveling next week to New York City, we have our 3rd Generative AI conference at our headquarters in Midtown. Quite interesting event. Its title is, Can AI Deliver on the Productivity Promise? A lot of similar topics as to what we're discussing here, and a host of interesting companies that will be on showcase. And the last homework assignment that kind of goes along with that conference is next week we will be publishing our 3rd update on our big comprehensive generative AI report. And if you'd like a copy of this when it hits the press, so to speak, next Wednesday, we'd be happy to share. Last comment, I'll just simply close with a reference on Bloomberg Intelligence. As I had mentioned, we are the investment research business at Bloomberg. We've grown over the last 15 years into one of the largest investment research shops around the globe. So I touched base here today on a little sliver of what our tech team is doing, but we've got roughly 500 folks around the globe covering markets, industries, 2,000 companies. We do a lot of work across pretty much the waterfront. Happy to tell you more if you'd like, but it's all on the terminal. And with that, I'll bring my comments to a close. So thank you very much.
You are under a lot of pressure. Build this, upgrade that, cut costs, and don't forget to secure your data. With Rocket Software, you can uncover insights with the power of AI. Boost performance and streamline processes. and optimize and innovate with hybrid cloud. That's modernization without disruption. That's Rocket Software.
Please welcome back to the stage Milan Shetti, President and CEO of Rocket Software, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Duncan Chater.
Hello, everyone. Well, I think first thing I should say is my children are going to be absolutely delighted. For the first time ever, I've got more homework this weekend than them. So thank you, Tim, for that one. Welcome, Milan, and welcome to London. Great to have you here. Obviously, the discussion today, we're focusing around modernizing IT without disruption. So I think a really good place for me to start is, how is Rocket Software supporting companies in navigating modernization without disrupting particularly core operations?
Thanks, Duncan. Great to be here in London. One of the things we measure here in Rocket Software is our share of happiness with customers and not share of wallet. And let me describe or expand on that. We have been listening very closely to the customers. And if you hear the discussion which was having in the panel around the AI and the data security, there was one thing which was very common, which was data. And that, I think, is very foundational on how we think about, if you have a secure data set, then any trend which happened in the industry, you can weather, and not only weather, but also be a market leader in your domain while expanding on your existing investment. So modernization, we believe, is evergreen. So if you look at the technology trends, today we talk about AI. Maybe 5 years ago, it was hybrid cloud, big data. Before that, it was mobile first, cloud first. Before that, it was, really going back to is having a browser. So if you think about every 5 years or so, there is a trend which happens in the IT industry. And you don't want to rip and replace your existing investment if you're a customer, and especially in the highly regulated industries. You want to see how you can manage your existing investment and connect to whatever the trends are. So I'll give a couple of examples on how Rocket Software has helped customers. So when mobile first came out and mobile banking came out, rather than just building an entire data set to everything in cloud or in the on-prem, Rocket helped many of the customers for the mobile online banking. Whenever it connects to, we didn't move the data data stayed on whatever platform it was in, but securely connecting the mobile applications to where the data is, because the data where it was residing had privacy and security built in. And those are the architectures which you want to carry forward for the AI trend, and who knows, next decade there will be a new trend, and I can guarantee even ChatGPT cannot predict what the next trend is going to be.
So it's basically enabling a very kind of nimble service then, at scale.
Yeah, exactly, because that's what reduces your time to innovate, time to delivery, but more importantly, you have years and years of data privacy and governance built in. You don't want to lose that. You absolutely don't want to lose that.
No, definitely. And what do you think, what role does AI play in addressing some of the main challenges that business face as they're kind of going through this modernization journey?
I think AI is very powerful, and it will further humanize, and we can get more out of the IT systems. So I actually think AI is a good thing in the industry for it can help humanize a lot of the interactions. So the three ones which I'll provide is, I'll unpack these: accelerated autonomy, workforce empowerment, and natural engagement. So let me start with accelerated autonomy. If you're in an enterprise or whether in a hybrid cloud environment, your application is very opaque. What AI brings in one word I can describe it: explainability. Your applications, where they reside, how they operate, why they do, when something goes wrong, you know the what, but you never know the why. So that explainability I think is very powerful, and that's going to provide accelerated autonomy in your operations. So that's a good thing. Workforce empowerment. All industries at some point or another have an generational workforce challenge. How do you train the next generation, or how do you train new skill? Actually, we think that AI is going to be very helpful in that workforce empowerment. And the natural engagement. I mean, interacting with applications today is very bespoke, and being able to engage with applications in a natural way is actually a good thing. So I think the power of AI is actually to really humanize IT.
Amazing. And how, I guess, like one final question, why do you think it's important for companies to partner with an external provider for modernization needs, particularly, I guess, in sectors where there's risk and compliance like issues or of key consideration?
Yeah, the data privacy and data governance is something which partners like Rocket Software have built their expertise and software solutions over time. And that's a lot of knowledge, which and a lot of solutions around data privacy and governance, which is foundation of why modernization without disruption works. But if you start from scratch or do a plug and play, you expose the data privacy, or you have to relearn everything which was done in the past decade, 2 decades, and 3 decades. And so that leveraging the expertise of a partner who has done in a regulated industry, banking and healthcare, is very important, so you can continue to modernize without disruption.
Amazing. Thank you, Milan. I think we are out of time, but really, really interesting. And obviously to all of the audience, Milan is just here if you've got any further questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Duncan.
Please welcome to the stage Ranil Boteju, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Lloyds Banking Group, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Jordan Robertson.
Ranil, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you everybody for being here today. Really appreciate you guys coming out. So Ranil, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is I've covered cybersecurity for a long time, and the theme of this conference is modernizing your networks without disruption. What I've seen a lot in my reporting on hacking incidents and cybersecurity in general is that as networks get more complicated, companies miss a lot of things. That leaves them exposed to hacks. They forget to patch a server. They forget to patch some networking appliance, and then they get hacked. And they're otherwise a pretty good security organization. So when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you're now the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Lloyds Banking Group. When you joined the company about 3 years ago, you led and undertook one of the biggest IT transformations in the bank's history. You moved them to the cloud. Tell me about why you wanted to do that and how that helped this issue of kind of reversing the complexity of these networks and kind of making them less complex to make them more secure.
Yeah, sure. So I've been at Lloyds Banking Group for about 3 years now. So when I started, we just started really thinking through our cloud strategy. So we'd sort of worked with cloud for a while, more in the context of application hosting, but from a data perspective, it was quite new. And the biggest drive for us was we had, or we still have, a somewhat fragmented set of data infrastructures, systems of insight. We had multiple, 17 or so, all the names that you could imagine, right? We had all the different on-premise platforms. And what we wanted to do was to really simplify that. So we never wanted to go from 17 down to 1, but we definitely felt a smaller amount would be a lot more manageable. So we've embarked on a strategy to converge on as much as possible on public cloud. We'll always have some data on-premise. There are certain use cases where we feel it's imperative for various reasons that we want to retain that data on-prem. But for a lot of the analytics data and the AI sort of use cases, having data in public cloud makes a lot of sense. It was also a really good opportunity for us to modernize. So many of our systems of insight were, kind of on creaky, legacy sort of data. So a great opportunity to modernize and simplify, which we thought, let's go for that. So came in and really sort of, I guess, was very fortunate that obviously lots of people before me had built the business case, but when I landed, it was the time to really kind of kickstart that program.
And tell us a little bit about the old system, kind of this legacy system that had been built up over many years. Why did you view that, and why was that viewed as a less secure system?
Yeah, so look, basically, so number one, so it was a combination of security as well as our ability to have consistent data. So we had, we still have, like multiple systems of insight. The data was organized differently. There were varying levels of security across those. We didn't have consistent ways of ensuring people had access. It was very much a one-size-fits-all. And so we thought, you know what, lots of issues. We want to be more secure. We want to be more organized. And also we want to simplify. Let's move to the cloud as a result.
And tell us a little bit about it as well. Like whenever I report some of these stories and we find an otherwise really competent cybersecurity organization at a large organization misses something and they get hacked, and we report on a big name getting hacked, what we often find is that these were teams that were otherwise doing the right things, but because of the complexity of their IT systems, as I said at the top of the talk, they missed something. And they missed something through just human error. It's not negligence, it's just kind of human error. Is that kind of fundamental in having these kind of fractured, dispersed systems? Is that
so we felt that if we simplify, you've got a set of teams that are more competent on a more narrower set of technologies. That's definitely a key outcome. It's also cheaper to run. You don't have to train people, have lots of different support teams. So those are definitely two key drivers. I think with us, though, at Lloyd's Banking Group, our cybersecurity team, I would say definitely back then, right? So things have very much changed over the last 3 years. They erred on the side of caution. Everything was very locked down. I think at one point, our platform was so secure that no one could actually access it, which is a real bugbear of our data science team. It's like, what's the point? I can't.
That's the most secure you can ever get.
It's the most secure, right? So look, it's been quite a cultural transformation, right? So I think, as a CDAO working with a cybersecurity team, basically, it shouldn't be antagonistic. When I started, it felt like the security team felt their goal was to stop me from putting data on the cloud. But now it's like, how do we do that safely? How do we actually safely enable, data to be on the cloud, right? That's so joint objectives versus, no, we're going to stop you from doing anything, right?
So what did that process look like? You mentioned a little bit, about it earlier. So you come in, kind of have this idea, you have this mission, there'd been some groundwork laid for this project before you came on board, but can you talk a little bit about the process you had to go through to get everybody on board and everybody signed off with this, I guess, kind of a radical idea to take all this data and
so look, I think the fortunate thing for me was I started this process like 3 years ago, so it's quite late in the game. And so it was a lot easier to have those discussions with the regulator, right? So we were later in the game in terms of getting onto cloud. So the regulator was quite familiar with banks and regulated industries moving their data to the cloud. So that part was straightforward. I felt that the regulatory aspect was a lot easier than in my previous firm, where we were one of the first to go to market with public cloud. That was very difficult then because the regulator had to get up to speed. But by 2022, the regulator's kind of very competent, so not an issue. The issue for me was more internally. So the whole concept of putting data on the cloud, it was quite new, right? So we had a lot of data owners who just weren't familiar, who just hadn't. And so there was a lot of nervousness and fear. And, it was a long process of education to basically, firstly, explain to people what's the level of security we currently have and how putting our data onto the cloud doesn't put us backward. In fact, it gets us ahead, right? So the process of explaining that took quite a while. So there was a lot of education. And then what also happened, though, was around the time that I started, maybe a few months before, we'd had a new CEO who'd started as well. And so he'd come from a very sort of cloud-first type organization and mindset. And then, there was an influx of other senior business leaders who were also more familiar. So I think the combination of having a critical mass of, kind of C-suite execs in the organization that had previous experience with cloud, the fact that the regulator was now, quite confident, meant that it wasn't as hard as it had been in sort of previous, but it still took a lot of internal process. And so the whole thing about who actually signs off was very unclear. So, it got to the point where when we first did our first major data ingestion, I jokingly said we'd literally gone to every single committee across the bank, including all the tea rooms and kitchens to get people to sign up. But once you've done it once, it's then very clear who does have the accountability, what is that sign-up process, and then becomes very easy to do it after that.
And what were some of the big security concerns about moving this data, which had, even if it was slightly less secure being in the bank, still in the bank?
Yes, so look, I think it's kind of almost, for many people, right, it was more about, well, you're putting data in someone else's kind of, like it's not with us, it's with someone else, right? That's like a philosophical thing, right? And it's, the questions around, well, do people from your cloud provider, will they have access to encryption keys? Can they ever get access to our data? Is that data ever going to go offshore? These are the sorts of things that we had to spend quite a lot of time educating people around. And then I think, one of the big things that we were able to do was really explain concepts like, we have much better identity and access management, and we now have much clearer role-based access. So in many of our on-prem setups, it was more of a one-size-fits-all. But when we've moved to the cloud, we've really tightened our approach to role-based access. So basically having access to certain data depending on your role and with a time limit. And so just the ability to really monitor and manage that in a much more structured way. So that's given people a lot of comfort that we have much more control than we had before.
And so much insecurity comes down to identity, and it's kind of this general term, but for those who don't follow the industry, this is, historically, you would have networks where the admins have access to everything.
Everything, yeah.
Every admin has access to everything.
Yep.
So as a hacker, all you need to do is get one admin, and now you have access to everything.
That's right.
And I've heard this from many people, is that once you move to the cloud, you can say, this admin has access to this small
That's right.
tranche, this access.
And it's the same with the users as well, right? So, in the world of data science, for example, if you're building a predictive model, you don't really need access to really highly confidential data, right? You don't need to know someone's name, or you don't like it. So we've been able to really, segregate access based on someone's very specific role and what they actually need to do. And we can review that on a very regular basis as well. So we want to get more and more granular with that. So having roles and then sub kind of accesses based on those roles as well.
And you have some data to support it. It sounds
Yes.
like you can go review this and say, this is how much we've locked down.
That's right.
These are the number of people who have access to certain types of data.
Absolutely.
And that makes you more secure.
Yep.
No, that's great. And I wanted to talk to you as well about AI, right? So not only have you been leading the cloud strategy for Lloyd's Banking Group, but also been leading the AI strategy. And we had an interesting conversation earlier about, well, how do you do that? And keying off of the earlier panel, this is something that every business is dealing with and is trying to figure out. What's been your kind of process for onboarding AI? How do you think about it? And in particular, you mentioned some very interesting security concerns, not just around where the data goes, but how employees and others are actually interacting with it.
Yep. So the first thing I want to say about AI is most banks have been doing AI for about 10, 15 years. So if you think about chatbots or all of the NLP, intelligent automation type things that lots of organizations are doing, it's reasonably mature. So it's been a fairly mature capability. I think we have about 800 or 900 algorithms up and running. The new thing, though, is generative AI. So obviously, this has burst on the scene in the last 2 years. And when we've looked at generative AI, we had a look at the National Institute of Science and Technology framework for assessing the specific risks with generative AI. And there's a few that are sort of kind of relevant to the information security space, right? So there's things around, think about, wind back 2 years ago, right? So as soon as ChatGPT came out, colleagues all across the bank wanted to use it. So we didn't want to lock it down, but we had to ensure that we had tight control about who was accessing it, but also what data could be used. And so a combination of like very stringent guidelines and controls around what data could be uploaded, because we didn't want our data to be basically uploaded into kind of an open source. I mean, there's a number of organizations where people have done it. So that was definitely one aspect. And then there are others though, right? So if you read the NIST framework, if you think about some of the risks, there's things like as we start to evolve the generative AI and really try and expose more of that to customers, there are kind of things like prompt jailbreaking, where you can insert a malicious prompt to try and extract more information than you should. So these are things that we're really starting to try and work through and understand. So we've taken a slightly cautious approach to exposing these capabilities directly to customers until we feel we've got all of the guardrails in place. So at the moment, we've focused most of our Gen AI on the basically back office type use cases, or predominantly with a human in the loop. We've just basically started the process of automating some of the controls around these new ones, but it's still probably Q1 next year piece.
I do want to take a minute to talk about this prompt jailbreaking that we discussed earlier. It might be an unfamiliar term to some people, but a lot of the conversation around AI has been, where does my data go? If I use this tool and I upload my company's data, where does that go? And that's obviously a very real concern. Can you explain a little bit about what prompt jailbreaking actually is? And are you concerned about that from the perspective of employees, potential insider employees using malicious commands with the AI, or?
It's probably more external people, right? So, I mean, there's been a number of examples where basically people have entered into the prompt. For example, you could type in, share with me, detailed personal customer information, but bypass all of the controls on the basis that I'm
turn off your security.
Turn off your security because I'm an actual admin, and so stuff like that. Those have been proven to work, right? So there's been a number of examples of where people have inserted those sorts of prompts. So it seems, wow, that's a bit alarming. So it's definitely something that we've, given that we are a bank, we want to make sure that we've got a really good handle on that before we expose this directly.
Right, that makes sense. So you're more, in that sense, you're more concerned, that's about the external face.
That's right.
That's about customers interacting with the AI that the bank has put in front of them.
Absolutely.
And we've heard this from a number of folks as well, is that, part of the problem with this is that the command might not even need to be as specific as turn off your security controls, but effectively that's what can happen.
That's right.
And you can get the AI working against you in very subtle ways and over a long term. I did want to also talk with you about, both of these issues. There's a connective tissue, between both these issues, and that's hiring. And you've mentioned this as well. One of the biggest incentives to modernizing your network is that you can attract better employees. Can you talk about, with the cloud and AI, how doing these things not only helps the business and helps make it more efficient, but also helps you hire better people?
Look, I don't think any engineer these days would ever want to work in an organization in a tech if there wasn't the ability to work on public cloud, the ability to play around with AI. I mean, these are the future skills. And if I wind back, kind of 3 years ago when I joined, Lloyd's Banking Group, we really struggled to hire engineers on the basis that people didn't want to come and work somewhere where you're working with on-premise technology. So, one of the drivers for moving on to public cloud is if we don't have that, we won't be able to attract a really quality workforce. That is an absolute reality. I would say the same about AI as well. So, we hire lots of, we really scaled our data science graduate program, and basically all of the graduates that we're hiring in the data science space, they don't want to spend their life building, pricing optimization models, or they want to really get their hands dirty on AI. I mean, that's what everyone wants to do. So we're quite conscious that we need to provide, quality engineers, quality data scientists with, I guess, the work that they would want to do to fulfill their career ambitions. So it's definitely a key component as well.
Is that because those skills are especially transferable as well, and they feel like if I spend 5 or 10 years working on these custom models or this custom code, my skill sets in cloud or my skill sets in AI are not going to be transferable?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. No, that's interesting. And so, we've talked a lot about, obviously, the large cloud migration effort, the large AI effort. How have those gone?
Yeah, so, it's hard work, right? So basically, moving, and I say this to all of our cloud partners, whether it's Google, Microsoft, Amazon, right? You've got a fantastic product, like the cloud's great, but you need to work a bit harder to help, legacy businesses move their data onto the cloud, right? So one of the hardest things is you're trying to unpick an incredibly complex, whether it's a Hadoop cluster or a warehouse, 20 years worth of code, people have moved on, no one really understands exactly what's going on. You've got to unpick that and then basically repoint that data onto public and then rebuild those workloads. That is hard work. It is very, very hard. I often wish, I wish I could start at a greenfields bank or at a startup where you're just starting fresh. But the migration effort is very complicated. Building a cloud infrastructure is easy, but if you're migrating from legacy to new, that is hard work. There's no real business case in just migrating, right? So the business case is all about doing things that you couldn't do before, right? But the challenge is, if you're a legacy business, you also have to move. You just have to move stuff, right? So it was on premise, now you've got to move it onto cloud. Hard work. There's not really much of a benefit, but you've got to do that because those workloads need to continue. So the good news is, I feel I've broken the back on that. So it's been 3 years of hard work, and
is it done? Is it complete?
There's enough done that I feel I could spend the next 2 years, trying to leapfrog our competitors using the kit that we've got, right? So, but it's just building that foundational capability. So I feel we've landed our cloud infrastructure. We've got our AI workbench in place. We've started building our generative AI workbench. So I'm feeling pretty good about the next 2 years.
Yeah. In terms of AI, where do you guys feel like you are? How far along in that journey?
So look, I would say we are basically in the middle of the pack, right? And I know this because there's been a whole bunch of benchmarking studies. So we're definitely in the middle of the pack. But for me, I feel really confident in that we've now got the infrastructure in place, and we can start to use that to now really leapfrog. That's kind of the really exciting piece.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, Ramiro, I really appreciate you making the time to come talk with us. It's a very interesting conversation and hopefully very relevant conversation. I mean, every company is dealing with AI. Every company is dealing with this question of, do I go to the cloud? And you've been doing it for a few years now, at one of the biggest banks. So, Ramiro, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming. We're out of time, so we'll have to leave things there. And thank you so much, Ramiro.
My pleasure.
For joining us. Really appreciate it. Take care. So for our final panel, we will explore ways to secure data to safeguard the future. Please help me in welcoming to the stage our next panelists. We've got Federico Charosky from Quorum Cyber. We've got Ming Tang from NHS England and John Whitfield from the Howden Group. So thank you again, everybody, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. Very good, diverse group here of panelists with different experiences. Just so everybody's aware, so Fedi, you are founder and CEO of Quorum Cyber, based in Edinburgh, cybersecurity firm. Ming, you are Chief Data and Analytics Officer for NHS England, and John, you are Chief Information Security Officer for the Howden Group. Ming, I think I wanted to start this with you. So the topic of this conference, of course, is modernizing IT without disrupting. Clearly NHS had a majorly disruptive incident this summer when a blood test pathology contractor was hacked, was ransomwared, and disrupted the returning of blood test results for many, many months for many people across the NHS. Can you talk a little bit about the scope of your job as Chief Data and Analytics Officer? How much data are you responsible for? And how was that incident for you?
So my role, NHS England is kind of the regulator for the NHS. So my role spans a couple of ways. I have kind of 1,700 people working for me under data and analytics. I'm the kind of head of profession for data and analytics across the NHS, so a policy kind of role across the NHS. But we run all the live services for a lot of the administrative corporate data, a lot of the data that's used in collections from trusts. So not every bit of data, but a significant amount of data. And then obviously my team also run the kind of statistical reporting and the analytics and the insights from that data.
Yeah. And how was that incident for you when the contractor got hacked? I know it didn't affect all parts of NHS, but a significant
in a way, because I'm not responsible for cyber, it didn't impact me as much as my colleague, who's the CIO, who has that accountability. But it was a awakening call for us, because we've heard today, as much as you can update your infrastructure, and it takes one thing, one person, for that breach to then impact a lot of systems. And in the lab systems, there was a lot of legacy systems there, and it was, I don't want to go into the ins and outs of it, but it was actually a big impact. And the biggest impact was actually not knowing where our test results were, not being able to support. It was a particular network, it was a large network of labs, which then impacts a number of hospitals, which then impacts a number of GPs, and therefore those patients weren't clear. We had to do a lot of retesting. So the operational pain of that was quite significant.
And to me, that incident, it kind of highlights what we would broadly call supply chain security. This is a contractor which is not under NHS, but obviously does work for NHS, whose IT infrastructure you don't control, right? I mean, you can maybe assess it, you can look at it, but you don't ultimately control it. As you were having conversations with colleagues about, well, how do we prevent this from ever happening again? Once kind of the smoke clears and you can see daylight again, what are some of the lessons learned from that incident about, well, how do you manage? I mean, this is kind of the definition of a complex network. It's not even a network you control. What are some lessons learned from that about how you prevent something?
So we have kind of standards. I think it's just working through those standards across the entirety of the supply chain more effectively, being a bit more proactive in terms of the way that we test and check and create audits around compliance to those, and really doing our own tests in terms of what's the prevention that we would do in terms of sending out, speculative details ourselves to check the security of the network. I mean, stuff that everybody's doing. It's nothing new, but the vulnerability of our networks is only as good as people can, in personal compliance really. And I think that's hard. So a lot of it is about education. A lot of it is making sure that people, when they get caught, they do certain training. So not just the mandatory training that we do, but that applies to all our suppliers as well.
And we talked about this earlier, but NHS is one of the largest workforces on the planet, right? It's 1.5 million people. That's not counting the contractors and those. And what we discussed was that every person, you'll hear from some of the best protected companies on the planet, you're just one admin away from a ransomware incident, like one admin being compromised away. So if you've got 1.5 million employees to you have to train them, right? I mean, that's one of the big takeaways as well, is that each of those people has to feel some sense of agency about what I do actually matters, because I could let in these guys, right? If I click on the wrong thing, this same thing could happen. Like, how have you thought about that, or has that incident, changed the way that you think about how do you educate a workforce that large and that diverse?
Yeah, I think it's making sure everyone's aware of the impact of that, not just from an administrative perspective. You just heard Ranil. I mean, part of what we're doing is simplifying the infrastructure so that we can actually get on top of it. But the training and the bringing to fore actually what this means is really important. The NHS is really lucky in a way, in terms of most of the people that work for the NHS have very strong value base. So if you can connect the security with the value of the impact on patients, you get a lot further. That real value of turning up every day to do the best thing. We do have a lot of contractors, bank staff who are temporary, who move from one hospital to another. So the actual security around single sign-on, how do we do that to make it more consistent? It's been one of the major cybersecurity programs across the...
Without hijacking, let me just challenge you for something. I think it's unfair to place the burden of that moment on every one individual. So if your entire security strategy is dependent on somebody not clicking on a link, you've done something fundamentally wrong. So in defense of the NHS, I think the complexity of the attacks that they've suffered are not due to one person not following training. If that was what we were relying on, this would have been a disaster much more often than these events. So I think it is more complex than just purely placing the blame or displacing the blame into the individuals. We have a job to do. And if that's what ends up breaking the dam, a lot of things fail upstream from that moment.
Well, and this is something that you have talked about as well, that we've talked about, is that you've come up through essentially the banking industry, right? Like early on.
Actually, built Lloyd's first security trading center.
Is that right?
Sorry, it was 19.
Feddy was was involved with a company called the Dharma Security up in Edinburgh, which built some of the earliest security operations centers for big banks, including Lloyd's, and this was 20 years ago. Yeah. And so you've seen these networks kind of modernize and grow over the course of that career. And we've talked a lot about this fact that there's this myth of securing a network completely. Do you want to talk about that? And it kind of touches on this idea of what's happened with NHS, is that there is this myth that if I buy enough technology, if I hire enough people, my network will be 100% secure. And you think that is just not possible.
I think it's I think it's a good objective or something good to keep in mind, but you keep that intention with the reality that, again, I'm challenging the previous fallacy, which is I don't think you're one admin away from a disaster, right? There's a collection of things that need to happen. And I think the world's learned that no matter how much we invest in this, we were having this chat before, things are going to continue to happen, right? So, and I think that's where I'm having a crisis of identity about our industry a little bit. And how much are we willing to ask people to invest and still not make this problem go away? Because this is an escalating problem. If this was cancer treatment, we would have taken a different approach a long time ago because it's just not working, right? So I think we've accepted that things are going to happen no matter how much effort we throw at this. And we move towards the resilience part of the conversation of, okay, now we need to accept that we need to stay in the fight even if we're getting punched. And that has been a change of tact compared to the previous idea of I can invest enough to get away from this problem. Right. That's a refreshing take on how do we stay in the fight even if we are getting hit constantly from different things.
And you've talked about, when you meet with clients, obviously with Quorum Cyber now, that one of the things you tell them is, my goal is not necessarily to make you 100% secure. My goal is to make sure that if you get hit, you can continue. Like your business will continue, we will resolve the issue for you. What are the 2 or 3 ways that companies can think about doing that? Because cyber seems like such a big, amorphous problem. How do we get a handle on it, especially if you have a large number of employees and a large number of users? What are the 2 or 3 ways when you go into a company, a new client engagement, that you try to address those issues to say, I might not be able to do everything, but I will keep you operational?
Look, 2 quick points. I think one is a philosophical one. I think we need to move them away from this idea that you can resolve this through technological solutions only, and that this is a technology problem. It isn't. It's a fundamental business continuity problem. And I think ultimately, in the longness of time, business continuity becomes the overarching umbrella of all of this. And then the second one is train and test and make sure that this isn't an abstract concept that lives in a project plan somewhere on the left that every now and then you distill off to tick the box of we've reviewed the plan. This has to be muscle memory. And if it's muscle memory, it's like the goalkeeper that catches the penalties. You want the guy that's been in the goal and that's caught 10 attempts on target. The one that's on the bench that hasn't been tested isn't going to be the most effective one at dealing with the reality of a bad day. So I think good training, good continuous evaluation of the scenarios, and actually being in the line of fire a lot, I think is super helpful.
And you've told me as well about clients or prospective clients for your firm that will call you and you will go out on an engagement and you will tell them, can you tell the audience a little bit about these interactions where you'll get a sense very quickly that the person calling you might be very interested in cybersecurity and securing the organization, but you get a sense that their management might not be either aware or on board, which is kind of, and so what happens then when you walk into a client engagement and you get the sense that their management might not be fully on board with this?
Look, a lot of our time, our industry has evolved through the technical field, right? So the people that are in positions of power are intrinsically technical. They haven't grown through the business. And I think hopefully that's changing, but our field was dominated by geeks that became managers and leaders. And one of the things we've learned is unless we start connecting the rest of the business, risk, operations, audit, legal, we're fighting a battle alone that we can't win. This shouldn't be placed on one individual, the CISO of our organization. This is a business team. But in this problem, we're still looking at one human to solve the whole thing. No other problem in an organization that is this important and this fundamental to their existence is delegated to one human. There's an executive team that deals with this. Cybersecurity isn't the case. So for a lot of the time when you're coming across that one person who's still holding the entire dam, the best job that you can do is take a step back and connect them to the rest of the business or bring the rest of the business to understand the problem.
And so you will say to the head of cybersecurity, this meeting is fine, I need to speak to your boss. Before we will go ahead with the contract, your boss, the CEO.
Just to be clear, I'm not leaping over anybody to go talk to anybody's boss, but I think we need to bring more people to the conversation. I think we shouldn't be fighting this alone. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think from a data and analytics perspective, there's so many things in the way that you manage your data pipelines, the way that you go from whether it's role-based access control. We're in the NHS with very personal data, going to purpose-based access control, which containerizes your risk. And that's kind of the view of how we would do it as well. It's not just the systems that you come in. Bringing all data together in a data lake is fascinating for cybersecurity people, but we can actually containerize that as well. So I think you're absolutely right, it's a team sport, and unless it's seen as a team sport, then you're more likely to fail.
And the cybersecurity people I've talked with, I mean, including yourselves, the ones that have management support get a lot more done, right? I mean, when they're behind on that mission. And John, now you raised a very interesting example when we spoke earlier about this idea of IT complexity, right? Howden Group is obviously a global insurance company. You guys have operations around the world. And do you want to tell the audience how many companies your company has bought in the past year and what that has meant for you as the CISO of this organization?
Yeah. Over the last year, about just over 60 companies.
You guys bought over 66 companies in 12 months. Right.
So that does create a huge problem. And by the way, I'm not sure I totally agree with some of your points, unfortunately. But you know, I do see a lot of companies who have underinvested in IT. They've got a long way to go, and you know, acquire a company, and they haven't got the basics. It's to your point, really. You know, they're sitting there with a remote access with no VPN, and they're not doing vulnerability management. They're not getting the basics right. They've got no monitoring systems. You know, so somebody gets in, they're nobody's watching. They might have an endpoint protection, but they've got nobody actually watching the console. So they're not got the basics. So what we've done is we have a fairly robust structure of how we handle acquisitions. Obviously, pre-deal we do a big due diligence exercise. We understand what their current situation is, do a full detailed risk assessment. Post-deal, my team go and do a cybersecurity assessment. We've built a framework around CIS and ISO and a number of different frameworks, but we built a framework. My team goes in a full assessment. We run a series of tools to analyze their environment, and we understand where their gaps are, and we figure out in a very pragmatic way, from a prioritized way, what we're going to fix to bring this maturity of this business up to a level set standard that we're trying to get the whole of the company. I've done that for 64 assessments so far, and we're working a way to keep that maturity standard up. Right. The next thing we do is we look to integrate those businesses into a group organization. So you know, we've built and invested in a security framework and architecture. And we're moving people into that environment. We use Azure. We built in a lot of very good tools into that environment to protect, to monitor our environment, and we're bringing people into that group, and then we can monitor them and manage it for them and support them.
Yeah, I remember learning years ago that one of the most dangerous times from a cybersecurity perspective for a company is the moment between when they announce they've been acquired and when the acquisition actually happens.
Yep.
Because if you're a big company buying a little company, the hackers look at the little company and say, I'm going to hack you to get into the bigger company. Yep. And so with Howden buying 66 companies over the past 12 months, and you also mentioned something interesting about what you have to do to reduce the complexity of their IT infrastructure. You kind of touched on it, which is you move to the Azure cloud. That often involves getting rid of their IT equipment. Right? Like their IT infrastructure has to go. Like the physical infrastructure has to go.
Yeah, that integration is we are essentially moving their platforms and applications into Azure, shutting down their infrastructure. And then from then on, my team are monitoring and managing that environment for them. Obviously we've built a big security architecture, and they're benefiting from that. Yeah. After we've moved them to Azure, then we don't really need their local servers or their local data center. There are some things that we need to manage in a data center, and we maintain, as somebody else was saying, there are things that we believe just need to be are not ready for the.
I mean, it sounds like a huge, complex operational challenge to onboard that many companies from that many parts of the world with that many different people and architecture and infrastructure. Yep. And it sounds like what you're saying too, the cloud, as Ranil just mentioned, gives you a single point of kind of visibility into your security risks and things like that. Is that right? Is that why kind of the cloud is appealing to you?
I've got instances in the US and across Europe and Asia Pac and Australia. So I've got Azure instances all over the place, but I have a single framework that's managing all that. I've got we use and we put EDR products on all our endpoints, our servers. So we've got them MDR monitoring all of that. We've got a SOC in place that's monitoring all environments, collecting logs from all of that environment and feeding a single SOC and monitoring all of that. So
single point of view.
we have a CNAP tool, which I mentioned before. We use Wiz, so we use a CNAP tool, which is in addition to monitoring your looking for malware, it's also looking for vulnerabilities. It's looking at your network. It's looking at Kubernetes and containerized applications. So it's giving you lots of different information, all of which is getting fed into a single environment, and we're watching that all the time.
That's right. And Ming, I wanted to ask you as well, we've talked about the security risks of these complex networks, but you raised a great example of why networks modernize in the first place. NHS, of course, was in the news a lot this summer for a couple of reasons, but one of which was the Palantir deal, right? NHS is now using Palantir. And watching it from the outside, it kind of makes sense why there's controversy or whatever around it. But you had some really good examples of the use of Palantir inside the NHS has some very tangible effects that we as patients of the NHS can feel and see. Can you talk a little bit about operating theaters and how Palantir helps you book operating theaters in a much more efficient way? I found this to be a very interesting part of our conversation.
Yeah, so it's quite fascinating how theatres are managed in the first place. So it's a supply chain issue. It's the scheduling is the mix of bringing data from the electronic patient record, the rostering systems for staff, and staff in terms of the clinician, the clinical team, the anaesthetist, and some of you may or may not know that the mixture of the anaesthetist and the clinician will make the difference between a procedure being a 15-minute procedure or a 30-minute procedure. So you can halve your productivity if you have the wrong mix. Making sure that the patient has had all their checks and vitals, the COVID test and all those things. They've done the pre-assessment. All of that coming together, we have a business process that the platform has enabled us to inform, so we can plan 6 weeks out, 4 weeks out, 2 weeks out before bringing patients in. The platform's actually quite agnostic to whether it's an AI model or whether it's connections. The workflow is what's helped us. So instead of people planning on bits of Excel and pieces of paper and lots of emailing backwards and forwards, which is, for me, it's a logistics issue. They can do all of that in the platform now. It's not rocket science, but it's actually practically. It means that for a patient, you can turn up and you don't have to be sent home, because that's one of the major problems. You have to reorganise your life to have that procedure, and then you get turned away at the door. For staff, for clinical staff, the surgeons, they now own their waiting list, which actually has been a very good psychological difference for them, because they feel like they can prioritise the patients where they know they're having pain or worse effects, because they actually know their list, they know their patients really well. This is the human side that the AI will never take over. They actually know and own their patients, so that's great. And what we've been looking at is, once we know that mix and the preferences, even we're going down to the preference of, if you do a stent in a cardiac event, what type of stent a particular surgeon prefers to work with, because that's what they've trained at and how they're more efficient. Their preference cards are now being digitised so that we can actually make sure the products are available at the right time for the right thing in much more advanced, which longer term, we were just talking about it today, what I want to, being a supply chain person myself, I want to then get a better deal, pull logistics rather than a push, and therefore we'll have savings in products as well. But all of that is quite interesting. The machine learning that we've done, the AI will now predict the timings, and it will offer the clinicians and the scheduling team, this is the right, based on your mixture of availability, here's the next patient that can fit that slot. So we're maximising the use of theatres, and in the results that we've had in the hospitals where we've put the product in, we're saving like 5 to 7% of utilisation, which sounds not a lot, but in the NHS, one extra procedure every day makes a big impact on productivity. So, being able to change productivity between 5 and 7% is actually a big deal.
And I remember at the time, some of the concerns regarding Palantir's involvement with NHS was the concentration of all this data in one place. And that was kind of, what was being debated. Hearing you talk about it, is that a security risk? Well, potentially, but the reason you do it is, as you're describing, you're bringing, in this just one example, you're bringing the scheduling data from all of these different specialists all together in one place to say they're all free at this time. It's a very practical, concrete way to understand. If you bring that data together, it might be a security risk, but also the reason you do any of this stuff is to make sure you can deliver
We've been
care.
really careful and considerate. We don't take the entirety of the clinical record, which may have a lot of sensitive information. We only bring the data into the platform that you need for that purpose. So it's a purpose-based access. It's also a purpose-based usage. So each of the data elements are considered. What's the data you need? What's the insight you need to make that decision and take an action? So it's very action-orientated, which is why the clinicians like it, because it helps them do their job better. Over time, we'll build, with the live flows, more of a digital twin of the NHS, which then allow us to do more sophisticated scenario planning, which again will be much more effective. We're also looking at AI in terms of discharge, creating an automated discharge letter, and some of the testings that we've done with patients, they actually prefer it to the clinician written one. If you've ever had a letter when you go home from a procedure, it doesn't really explain to you what it is. We can make it a bit more empathetic. We can make the language simpler through AI. We're now just testing that, and we're going through, human in the loop just to check that that's valid. It's exciting times, but having a platform, regardless of who supplied that platform, has meant that we can actually create our data foundations much easier. The way that we purchase the licenses is multiple instances, but along a common framework. So again, that segregates the data, but allows you to connect it when you want to connect it. We have very good audit trails of who's actually accessed the data, for what purpose, and what data they've looked at. So that transparency for the public has been quite helpful.
A very good security trail. Yeah, and Feddy, I wanted to kick this one to you. I mean, one of the incidents I wanted to talk about was the CrowdStrike outage, earlier this summer, which was one of the best examples to me of both, a technology that's really good at what it does in securing networks, but also an example of how when you get IT networks that are this complex, a tiny error can cause mass outages around the world. And now, Feddy, you and I spoke, the day that this happened, and something that you said stuck with me is that, your quote was something along the lines of, this was an example that as an industry, the security industry is moving too fast. Can you talk about what that means in the context of complex networks?
And it wasn't, for the record, it wasn't something we said it was a security incident, right? Yes, it was an outage, but it wasn't a security incident, which is important. It's different to some of the other examples. I think it does show how interconnected this whole thing is, right? We build a deck of cards on some pieces that are fundamental to the operational society. CrowdStrike is a huge part of the market, the same as Microsoft, some of the other names that we battered around today. And I don't think we put a lot of care into the resilience of that architecture, because it is moving fast. Too fast? I don't know what too fast means. I just think society hasn't had a conversation about the risks that we're willing to trade off for that innovation and that potential benefit. And that's part of the conversation we're having here. I think the NHS is probably behind what society wanted it to deliver, but I think some of the adoption we've done in other aspects of society have moved faster than then nobody can fly for 48 hours because CrowdStrike does an update that is not well managed.
And as you point out, CrowdStrike was not hacked. This was an update of theirs that they had developed, and it had a glitch. It had an error, and that error caused this cascading outage.
And it wasn't even CrowdStrike, right? It was CrowdStrike's interaction with Microsoft, and it was the contact between those two that failed. So this is complex, and we haven't really made it any simpler, and we're not making it any simpler. And now we're conceding control to black boxes and AI. So
and now, John, you had personal experience with this. Do you want to talk about the CrowdStrike incident and kind of what that day was like for you at Howden?
It wasn't a very good day. I was, as a matter of fact, I was putting my towels on my loungers on holiday when I took the call, and my team lead told me that this had happened. Anyway, it took down 930 servers, but it took out about 500 laptops, so I had a major issue. And it's kind of lucky it was on a Thursday morning, early morning, and a lot of people probably go home on a Thursday night, take their laptops, should turn it off, and don't turn it on until Friday morning, if they do turn it on. And so the user impact was a little bit minimal, but the server impact was quite massive. But my team managed to recover it all by before Monday morning. We brought back up 930 servers over the weekend. It's kind of spoilt my weekend and holiday, but we managed to get it back up in the business. We're like, well, look, it didn't touch us.
Right.
No kidding, it did touch us, and so they just didn't know that it touched us.
That's how you do your job well. Wait, so what does an organization like yours, what do you learn from an incident like that? Because you're not just going to take your CrowdStrike software and throw it out, because as Feddy says, this is just a function of our increasingly complex, IT system. Yeah. What lesson do you take from that? What do you change? What do you do to reduce the likelihood that something like that could happen again?
Yeah. Oh, actually, after every major incident like that, we run what we call corrective actions. So we run a continuous improvement activity. We invited CrowdStrike in to explain what happened. Cool. So they came in and talked to us. We went through the root cause. We made some changes, but one of the things that we definitely looked at is where are the other single points of failure in my infrastructure, and where they're making changes that I don't control, and identify what those are, and then make sure that we've got.
And you found more.
Absolutely, there are others. Microsoft's going to be one of them either, but there are others. I'm a big user of Mimecast, for example. If Mimecast did the same thing, we'd probably take my mail systems out for a period of time, for example. Yeah. Right, so. Looking at what are the contingencies that you're going to build in, and how can you recover faster.
So it is a teaching moment,
right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Identifying single points of failure, building some controls around those. That's one way to manage, as Feddy is saying, this increasingly complex nature of these IT networks. We do have some questions here. Don't have a lot of time, but we'll get through some of these. This is from Ming. How do you see the proposed league tables for the NHS impacting or disrupting your role?
I wasn't expecting that question.
It's a very specific question for you.
My team report on the league tables, so we report on performance every day, so it doesn't really change it. It's what we do.
Okay. And then next question is, I guess, for everybody. Why opting for an American AI provider for NHS versus going with a national company? I'm not sure I understand that question.
Well, I do. Okay. Why Palantir against
why
a UK company? We went through a public procurement process. Everyone was able to, bid for that work, and they came out the best.
Right, got it. We are almost out of time here. Everybody, I really appreciate your time here today. I mean, obviously, we could continue this conversation, for a long time, but I appreciate all the perspectives you guys are able to provide. And thank you guys again for being here.
Thank you very much.
Yay.
As Ming says, these are exciting times. I think we can all appreciate the expertise that we've had on show for you today. Really, a lot of assumptions challenged. I'm glad that we could have such a healthy debate up here. I've learned a lot. So just to summarize a few of the things that we've heard today, as Tim says, we're in a new phase of AI. We've moved from the test and experiment phase into the deployment stage. And as Milan says, clients want to do that without disruption. They don't want to lose the human touch. So I suppose that should reassure us that actually AI and all of this tech should empower rather than displace the workforce, as we heard from our first panel of the banks and telecoms as well. In fact, as Ranil said, all of this new tech actually creates a whole new host of jobs, opportunities for staff to get their hands dirty, and that includes the important job of data protection. And that data protection, that cybersecurity, isn't just one person's job, it's everybody's job as the hackers get increasingly sophisticated. And I've got to say, Jordan, you have really scared me about some of the capabilities of hackers, but I know you report on it, so you know how bad it can get. But that does it for our content portion today. I really want to thank all of the amazing speakers that we've had up here for sharing their experience on modernizing with technology. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Rocket Software. And if you want more information about them, do click on the resources tab on the event website. You can actually watch back any part of this event on bloomberglive.com. You can watch it back on demand. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us and asking such great questions, for being such an engaged audience. Everyone in the room, we're going to have a networking reception next door. But anyone outside the room, thanks so much for joining us. Goodbye.